Hi there. Welcome to another episode of this video series I created a little while ago that I call What Makes This Pop Song Work. Just as a quick reminder, the basic theme here is that a lot of pop music tends to be, I think it's fair to say, simpler, at least harmonically, than most jazz or classical music. But as a result, pop songs sometimes find some pretty clever and creative ways to create musical interest. And sometimes that can be really interesting to break down. We've looked at some examples in the past from Fleetwood Mac and Tracy Chapman, but today I want to go back to where this kind of all started and do a movie theme. My first one of these videos was on the theme song to the classic horror film Halloween, which was kind of just based around three notes, if you recall. And today I want to look at one that we kind of all associate with just two notes. Because if you hadn't heard, this is the summer of Jaws, the 50th anniversary of that great film. And that one, too, had a very simple but very memorable theme song. But before we even kind of get into the music theory behind it, I read an interesting background story on the movie recently and how this was early in Steven Spielberg's career. And apparently the shooting didn't get off to a very good start. In fact, Spielberg was getting worried that the whole project was going to be canned. And one of the issues was they were having problems with the big mechanical shark. I guess on one of the first days of filming, it sank. But what happened was, I guess kind of out of necessity, but it turned out to be, sort of a blessing in disguise, was that they wound up taking a more minimalist approach to how they used and shot the machine protagonist. So throughout the movie, as you remember, what you get are a lot of shadows and silhouettes, and then a lot of fins just popping up out of the water. And sometimes its presence is just implied by something like the resurfacing of one of those floating barrels. But clearly, in hindsight, this turned out to be a super effective way to create extra drama and suspense. And then maybe serendipitously, the composer John Williams took a similarly minimalist approach to scoring the film. So I want to look at what was going on musically with these two notes. But first, one more fun fact. So a lot of people think that maybe Williams borrowed the idea for that theme from Dvorak, and specifically the beginning of the final movement of his Ninth Symphony. And it's certainly plausible if you listen to it. And then that's off and running. I've never really heard if Williams confirmed or denied that, but he was known for, some might say notorious for, kind of taking ideas from classical music. But to be fair, that's kind of the nature of the job, right? You're creating a lot of music in a short period of time. Directors are often saying, I want this specific emotion for this scene. So naturally, you're going to take some ideas off the shelf. And I don't think anybody would quibble with the idea that John Williams' body of work at this point speaks for itself. Just the film scores alone, right? From Jaws to E.T. to Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Home Alone, Jurassic Park, Schindler's List. The list goes on and on. One nice story I heard about Schindler's List, after a screening of the film without the music, Williams was kind of overcome with emotion, and supposedly he told Spielberg, I think you need a better composer than me to do this. And Spielberg supposedly said, I agree, but they're all dead. So anyway, let's talk about, well, on the minimalist idea, sorry, I forgot. Apparently another story goes that Williams first presented the idea he had to Spielberg, and Spielberg, his first reaction was that he thought it was a joke. He's like, you're kidding, right? That's it? But of course, as we know, it turned out to be super effective that way and consistent with the approach to the film he was taking. So let's talk about what's going on with these two notes more musically in this context. So a lot of times the way I like to start these videos is to ask, so what key are we in? Which often turns into, what key do we think we're in? Because one way that pop music likes to try to create interest sometimes is what I call delayed gratification, and there's a whole basket of ways that people do that. But what's happening here, I'll identify these two notes as E and F. So I might ask you what key we're in, and you might say F major, right? It sounds plausible. The problem is, I think you and I all both know this song well enough to know it doesn't sound like a major theme, And in addition to that, we've got sort of this dark, ominous tone being created already because the theme is being played in a very low register by a tuba, actually. So it turns out that pretty soon into the theme, we do get some accents and some D roots that tell us that we actually are in D minor. Suspenseful pauses. Now we have a ostinato this F, E to F is turning into. And now we're starting to get some Ds. So now we know we are in fact in D minor, but we don't get that right away. It's delayed, like I said, and it's kind of like we're trying to figure out what's going on. Like the swimmers in the water don't see anything, but they sense something's wrong. Then we start to get these roots and these accents, and then all of a sudden they do see a fin, and the pace is picking up, and they see it circling, and it's approaching, and now suspense is turning into terror. So that's kind of the basic gist of the theme, but then the question is, could it really be that impactful based on just 2 or 3 notes? And to me, the answer is kind of like with the Halloween theme. Yes, there were 3 notes, but in that case, it was John Carpenter. He did some other very cool things that kind of really made it interesting musically and much more effective. And that's going to go on here too. So let's talk about just a few things that Williams does to do what I call just sort of creating a cacophony of dissonance over this simple but already sort of tense theme. So we'll just kind of pick them off as we go here. Something's happening here. Okay, so what's happening now, first thing he's doing is he's adding over this D minor in E flat 7 and an F7. You know, the E flat obviously is a half step up from D, so that's pretty dissonant. So that's obviously not a pleasant sound. Okay, a new note just came in there, and this is going to be interesting too if you were listening closely. So this is kind of an upper harmony to the E and the F, and the 2 notes being added are B flat and B, which are the tritones of E and F respectively. Now what's a tritone? Well, it's kind of the most dissonant interval that is, for reasons that get into the natural overtone series, which is a whole nother video probably. But basically the idea is, you know, anytime you play a note on any instrument, you hear that note, and you also hear a series of overtones, and the relative strength of those overtones kind of determines what that instrument sounds like. It's timbre, we call it. And so tritone is pretty far out on the natural series, and what happens is we really want it to resolve to a nice perfect fifth, which is one of the first intervals in the natural overtone series. So now we've got these tritones going on. Now this is building, and it's going to turn into a big wash and a splash, so to speak. Okay, so now we have this sort of breakdown, and we get a new ostinato coming in, if you listen closely. So this is an E flat major triad to an A major triad in second inversion. And those 2 triads are a tritone away. So again, a very dissonant sound. And then there's going to be a new melody coming over that. So a new melody that I'm going to say it's sort of a combination of the E flat and F we had going on before. And I'm going to call it, if you put them together, I say it's kind of E flat Lydian, which is a mode that sort of gives you a feeling of where exactly are we, but so you put the 2 together. Whoops. what's going to come next. Something that's going to really surprise you. Wow. So out of nowhere, we get this sweet flute melody, probably the last thing you would expect. And what this shows, which I'm sure any studied classical composer knows, is that consonance is completely relative to the context. In the right context, that would be obviously a super sweet, right? It sounds like a little folk song or something. But over this, what I call a cacophony of dissonance that's been so firmly established as our context, it sounds completely out of place, almost creepy or jarring. You know, we have these tritones going on in this. Completely different effect, right? Consonance or dissonance depends entirely on the context. We get one more stanza of this pretty tune. There's those again. And we get a little harp thrown in there, which is just kind of for, I don't know, effect. It was actually two diminished arpeggios, one based on C sharp going up, from what I hear, and then on D going down. So that's a lot of stuff. And then in most versions of this I hear, it sort of fades out. Like the shark has made his hit, he's heading back out to the ocean, unfortunately to return at an undetermined time. So that's kind of my take on that song. I hope you enjoyed it. I think it shows that creating something so memorable and distinctive from 2 or 3 notes is no joke. It's quite a feat. And I hope you get a chance maybe to go back and watch the movie, maybe with some fresh ears, and listen to some of these ideas. You know, good film music is almost like it's doing its job if you hardly notice it's there. And I hope if you get to go on a beach vacation, you're not too freaked out to wade into the water, because, you know what, I'm sure it's perfectly safe. Well, probably. See you next time.